Hey guys, it's Bella, and in this video I'm going to show you how to read manuscripts written in Charlemagne Minuscule script. And after Gothic script, this is the most important script that we'll be covering in this course. Tons and tons of manuscripts are written in Charlemagne Minuscule, and many are available online, so really valuable to be able to read it. So this map shows the division of Europe between the major empires in the year 814 Common Era, which is when the Frankish Empire was at its zenith. So you can see that the Frankish Empire controlled lands from Germany into sort of northern Spain and northern Italy. Huge area. And this whole area would come under a single script in the 9th century. So first we need to know some history for context about Carolus Magnus, and that's his coin in the bottom there. So Carolus Magnus, which we anglicised to Charlemagne, was likely born in some part of Germany in the mid-8th century Common Era to King Pepin the Short of Francia. He quickly conquered other Frankish, Saxon and Lombardic territories, uniting them into the Holy Roman Empire, which officially began when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day 799 Common Era, because Charlemagne really did envision this as a rebirth of the ancient Roman Empire. And you can see in many ways on his medallion how he's positioning himself as a Roman emperor. He's got the title Carolus Imperator Augustus. You've got the laurel wreath on his head. He's clean shaven like a Roman, not like a barbarian. He's wearing a Roman military cloak on his around his shoulders there, and he's also using a K for the start of his name. These are all very Roman traits. As recorded by his biographer Einhard, Charlemagne had this weird obsession with literacy, because although he could speak Latin, he actually couldn't read or write it, and he spent a lot of his time, apparently, attempting to learn. There's this really cute story about how Charlemagne kept a wax board and a stylus underneath his pillow, and he would practice writing his letters before he went to sleep. It's quite a sad sort of story, really, if it's true, but yeah. Part of the reason why he was so obsessed with writing is he was obsessed with the ancient Romans, and again, stories say that Charlemagne spent his time bathing in ancient Roman bathhouses, imagining himself as a Roman emperor. So you have a bit of like medieval LARPing there. And here is a charter by Charlemagne, and you can see his monogram in the bottom below. There it says Carolus Magni, right there. So the Carolingian Renaissance was made possible by the fact that Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire united much of Western Europe, providing thereby the political stability necessary for education to flourish, and also provided the patronage of monastic scriptores, so it gave them the money to buy their inks and their parchment, where scribes were also trained and where the clergy was educated. In 787 Common Era, Charlemagne issued a capitulary calling for scholars from around the world to come to his court, and many of these scholars were later to be awarded with prominent church positions. This is one of the reasons why Charlemagne Minuscule script has influences from several different kinds of scripts. When these scholars returned to their home countries, they would bring Charlemagne Minuscule with them and all of its associated literary conventions, and sometimes they would bring classical texts back with them as well, because along with a desire to unite scripts in the area, there was a desire to preserve the classical education. And in fact, many of the earliest copies of classical Roman texts that we have are preserved in Carolingian manuscripts. Part of the work Carolingian scholars did was to establish a standard educational curriculum, such as Alcuin of York's work in establishing the trivium, which are 3 subjects. It might be rhetoric, logic, and mathematics. I may be getting this wrong though, which are believed to lie at the core of ancient learning. And Alcuin of York was an English person, obviously, who was one of these people who returned to England in his old age and brought Carolingian script back with him. It was these scholars who also standardized the Latin language itself, and they would adhere to classical Latin grammar while still allowing for the coinage of new words, so they could fit Latin to the requirements of medieval times while also emulating the classical world which Charlemagne admired so much. Charlemagne heavily promoted the hitherto diminished Latin education because Latin was really efficacious as a lingua franca to govern his new empire. If we go back a bit and look at the map, we can see that there's actually quite a few different languages here. We've got sort of Germanic languages in the north. We've got in this whole region we have a sort of Romance language continuum. So people up here may be able to understand people from here fairly easily, but they won't understand people all the way down in Rome or in Toulouse. So you really needed a standardized Latin language which can help to unite people across this vast empire, and so that commands and letters that Charlemagne sends across his empire can be understood by his subordinates in these regions. Part of the reason that Carolingian scholars developed punctuational apparatus is because they needed Latin as a lingua franca, because by this time the vulgar Latin that common people were speaking was so different to the vulgar Latin, say, of Jerome's Bible translation, that ordinary people couldn't read it, and they started to refer to this as a different language, usually lingua romana, or sort of the Roman language. And so because these people were no longer really native speakers of vulgar Latin, Carolingian scholars developed punctuational apparatus for manuscripts. So they would start putting spaces between words, and they would use question marks to help make a text more intelligible. And these were features which first emerged among Irish scripts. So let us look now at Caroline Minuscule script and see what the letters are. So Caroline Minuscule script was developed from half uncial as a letter stock, but it had influence from loads of scripts, but especially insular script. And it also had many regional variants, with styles developing around different scriptoria within the empire, but these variants are fairly subtle, and Caroline script is generally recognizable wherever you are. Many of the defining characteristics of Carolingian script became widespread precisely because they make everything very legible. It's quite an easy script to read. So the main features of Caroline Minuscule are the introduction or the reintroduction of the sort of small rounded uncial A, a looped sort of curved G and a straight backed D, the use of a rounded nib, and a general lack of serifs at the end of pen strokes. A cursive tall S, which is distinguished from R in its height and by the curve of its shoulder stroke. They had regularized distinct abbreviations for UR and US. The UR looks a bit like a 2 written on top of a word, and US is a sort of like a backwards C written on top of a word. Whereas in certain insular scribal traditions, there were varied traditions for how the UR and the US abbreviations were actually written on the page. And lastly, Caroline script actually tends to use fewer ligatures than, say, Beneventan or Merovingian scripts did, but some of these ligatures remain, such as the ampersand, AE, RT, ST, and CT. And here are some letter forms of Caroline Minuscule script. We can see a few variations in the types of the A. So we've got the looped half uncial A here. We've got the OC like A coming from insular and also Beneventan script. We've got a more open A, which would be in the former Francia, in parts of Francia, remnant of Merovingian script. And I believe this is somewhat evocative of kinds of Beneventan script also, but I'm maybe forgetting. They had sometimes two variants of the D, but generally the D was straight backed more commonly. We see the rounded G. We don't have a flat top G like we have in insular and Beneventan. What other features do we have here? We have the tall S, and this is Caroline script almost never has the rounded S of half uncial, or of sort of full uncial rather. The T, they sort of stop looping the T, which thank God. So you can actually distinguish a T from an A or a C or whatever. It makes a world of difference. Sometimes they started to draw the U and the V differently as well, interestingly enough. Here is the R as well. You'll notice the R is significantly shorter than the S, and its shoulder stroke flicks up a little bit. And down here are some abbreviations and ligatures. So we have ecau data, which stands for AE. We have CT, ampersand, NT, and this is room. I think that's RT, ST, US, I think. OR. Maybe this is also US, I'm not certain. Anyway, let us move on. So we'll look at some actual scripts. So here is a really cool manuscript, Paris Bibliothèque Nationale de France, MS Latin 1154, folio 132R, and this is the Planctus Carlolimagni, so it's the death song for Charlemagne, which is sung at his funeral. And as you can see, we actually have the melody recorded in mnemic notation, and I've given you a link where you can go and listen to a recording of this song, and it's quite dramatic, it's quite evocative, it's really cool. We get some of the earliest music recorded in this time, and I'll read out what's on the text page for you. Notice that the red script is actually rustic capitals. It's still being used in the later Middle Ages as a highlighting script. This isn't, and the red text is what actually is Caroline minuscule. So incipit planctus Caroli, and then a solis ortu usque anocidua litorre maris planctus pulsa pectora ultramarina, oh goodness, agmina tristitia. So this is from the rising of the sun all the way to its setting, at the shore of the sea. The lament, the lament strikes the chests, your people's hearts, beyond the seas. I think this is with the struggle of sadness, tristitia. So it's quite melodramatic lyrics, but I like it. Here is another really interesting example. This is Paris BNF Cos Latinos 9768, folio 13R, and these are what are called the Oaths of Strasbourg, and these are oaths which were sworn by Louis the German and Charles the Bald. And what's interesting about them is that they are the earliest accepted Romance vernacular texts. Now, the line between a Romance language and Vulgar Latin is very obscure. If you want to see a text that's really like in between, I recommend the Ostrogothic Cookbook, and I've got a whole video analysing the language of that manuscript. But these oaths of Strasbourg are uncontroversially accepted by scholars as being a Romance language, and these ones here are written in Carolingian script. Some of the ways we can tell are this looped A. We can see, do we have a G anywhere? Do we have a G? Looking for a G. Someone find me a G. Oh, I shouldn't go. Oh, there we are. Lingua. We can see a rounded G there. We can see the spacing between the words and sort of full stops. We can see relatively few abbreviations, just final abbreviations for the most part. We see the ampersand, blah blah blah. So I'll read these out for you now. So, pro Deo amor et pro Christian poblo et nostro commun salvamont, dist dien avant, in quant Deus savir et poder medunant, si salvareo, quist in neon fratre Carlo, et in adiudha, et vicad huna cosa, sicut perdret son fratra salvardist, e no quid il mi altra si faret, et abluder nul pled nunquam prendre qui meon volcist, meon fratre Carle indamnosit. Which is this is basically very early French. So, for the love of God and for the Christian people and our common salvation. Goodness. And to be honest, it's a bit hard for me to translate the rest. I'm not great at medieval French. I think I've done it at some point. What does this say? anyway, let's continue. We'll later see that they have the same version of the oath given in German. Here is a later version of Carolingian script. We can see all the same features though. We can see the curved G, we can see the spacing between the lines, we can see the generally curved appearance of the letters as well, is something that I should have pointed out. A lot of sort of rounded strokes. We can see the tall S everywhere. I don't think I can see a curved S anywhere. We can see the X with a line going down, and this particular passage is De Raris Fabulis, and it's a text that I really love because it's just everyday stories that help people learn how to speak Latin. And this one tells the story of a student who doesn't really know very much Latin, so so I think this says here, but all of these people are healthy, and they say to the bishops, to the sort of first among the priests, now this is an interesting construction, and habes linguam latinam, do you have the Latin language, meaning sort of do you speak Latin? And this says, yes I do, but I don't speak it very well because I know that I've not read enough. However, I've been among the scholars, and I have heard readers teaching and preaching, and I have heard them sort of marvelously studying day and night and speaking, and I think this might be sort of even sort of practicing in their sleep. However, I have learned in their midst, I am but of small character, small ability, and in studying the language, meditating on the language, I only know a few sounds, syllables and words. I recognize them, but I don't know how to respond to these grammatically, because I'm ignorant of the rules of grammar, and also of the examples of the poets. And it's just really a sweet little moment of admitting a situation that I think we all come to medieval Latin and ancient languages just like this monk, knowing just little bits here and there but not being able to fully put the story together. And yeah, it's just very nice. I'll read out for you from the beginning in the Latin just so you can get a sense of it. So, habes Latinam linguam etiam tutique non tam bene sapio, quia non multum legi, sed tamen fui inter scholasticos et audivi lectores docentes, quae predicantes atque illam mirabiliter die et nocte meditantes atque digentes et obsumum facientes, unde et ego ex illis aliquid quando I think sum parvus ingenio, lingua tamen meditatione pauca sonna. I don't know what this is actually. It might be and. It might be the word for the abbreviation for est actually. Sonna est voces vel verba. Recognosco, sed etiam hec regulariter respondere non possum. Ignoro enim regulas grammaticorum, nec exempla poetarum, et dixit ille clericus ad episcopis magister ave. So it's a nice little little story there. So, scribal abbreviations. We've gotten to the really big, chunky part of this presentation. I apologise. So as you can probably tell from the passages we've just done, because scribes in the Carolingian Renaissance were producing so many new books to support the new educational program scribes were making so many books in large quantities, they had to start abbreviating more in order to get out more books. And the abbreviations which they developed for use in writing Latin were also used in abbreviating vernacular texts. So we can see here actually, this early French text actually uses quite a few Latin abbreviations. So namely it uses pro here. That abbreviation P with the line going down is pro. We have nostro as well with the line above. Do we have any other obvious ones? We see M suspended in noqua, etc, etc. So, oh, and lastly faret as well, using the ampersand to represent the ET sound. So it works quite well with the Romance languages because they have many of the same sounds as Latin. It's harder in the Germanic languages, where obviously Latin is not as well suited for writing them. However, Germanic languages such as Old English do develop some abbreviations, as we will see in next week's video. But to go back to the topic of abbreviations in Latin texts, in Caroline script, certain abbreviations are used, but generally they're still not overusing them, at least in the early phases of Caroline script, and they're more commonly used at the end of words. And lastly, certain kinds of texts like Gospels are less likely to be abbreviated, and unfortunately there's tons of these abbreviations and you do just have to learn them. In homework or exam, because I was preparing this for an exam, you will sort of expand your abbreviations within square brackets. So I believe actually, well, the example there, right, the letters that are outside of the brackets are what you'd see written in the manuscript, but in your transcription you would write out the whole thing in order to make clear that you are filling in what's on the page. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to basically brush through these, but I'm going to pause for like 5 seconds on each picture so that you can look at these abbreviations yourself and take them in. I'm not going to read them all out to you because it'll take ages and there's not much point. There is a dictionary with all these abbreviations which you can go and download. I will link to it in the description, and that's where I've taken these pictures from. So here we go. I know. Yep. But wait, there's more. I got something for you. You're kidding me. Oh no. We're almost there. No, we're not. And we're still not done. There. This is probably how you're reacting now. You're going like, it's too much. I can't handle this abbreviation. And before you give up, if you don't know how to expand an abbreviation, because there are a lot of them, it's very reasonable to not know. It's perfectly acceptable to put the question marks in square brackets. So to take the example that we had before, you can write out PXPI amore as pro Christi amore, with the P and the 2 question marks within square brackets, and so and so. I mean, in the exam, but in just paleography in general, you probably would be expected to know your nomina sacra just because they come up so often, so you should be able to expand those. But the regular ones, you don't need to be able to. You can use the slides I've just given you and also the dictionary as a reference guide and just use them until you remember them. I mean, it's basically what I did. It is a lot of learning. But I need to point out that if you are an English speaker and you don't speak good Latin, you have a much harder challenge than most people, because most of these abbreviations, you don't have to like learn them very much because they have clues in the letters themselves and they're quite obvious from the language. So just like we understand the abbreviations thanks fam, see you later in a text, to them it would be just as easy to understand what these various abbreviated words actually meant, especially given the context of the sentence and Latin grammar, etc. And it does help undeniably to know the language of the script that you're transcribing in paleography, and this is why in most medieval studies master's degrees Latin is a compulsory module. The reason I don't have any videos, and probably won't ever have videos on my channel teaching you Latin itself, is because frankly there's lots of people already doing that on YouTube who are better than I am at doing it, so there's not much point in me adding to the huge piles out there. In terms of resources, I can recommend Evan de Milner and Scorpio Marcianos' channels. They're very good resources to help you learn Latin. However, because as of next week we will actually have the vernacular, we will have English writing, I will try to include more English examples in these slides and these videos so that viewers of mine who don't speak Latin can follow along and maybe benefit from some of the manuscripts. So one last note is the matter of the ecau data and the TICI sound. So the ecau data rather is abbreviation for the AE diphthong in classical Latin, which in classical Latin times would have been pronounced as I, but in vulgar Latin was pronounced as an E, and writing it as an E with the line below it to indicate the abbreviated letter became quite common from the Carolingian era onwards. However, by the end of the Carolingian era, scribes had gotten so used to writing the tail at the end that sometimes they forgot to do it, and they forgot that the AE was ever there. So the spelling of AE as E in early modern transcriptions can sometimes help us to identify texts that the exemplar came from. So we have some texts, such as the Edict of King Theodoric, which only survive in transcriptions of medieval manuscripts made in the early modern era, and the manuscripts themselves have now been lost. And based on the spellings of some of these early modern transcriptions, we can identify with some degree of accuracy a likely age of the manuscript, because if the manuscript writes out the AE consistently, it's quite likely to predate Caroline script, and if it doesn't, it's likely to postdate Caroline script. This consistent spelling of AE as E is one of the key features characteristic of medieval Latin, of the sort of high medieval and late medieval periods. Another common spelling variation which became widespread in the Carolingian era is the spelling of Latin TI as CI, or sometimes even as SI actually, and this is due to medieval palatalization of velar and palatal consonants preceding the vowels I and E. So letters CI in medieval Latin could actually represent a range of sounds from chi, ci, ti, or ki, and in modern ecclesiastical Latin it's pronounced as a tsi. So tsibi as an example to you, but it's usually not clear in medieval Latin what TI or CI actually stands for in terms of its sound, but you need to be aware of that distinction, because sometimes they are writing from dictation, these scribes, remember, like in previous lessons, so they're hearing somebody read out a text and they're writing it down. So if they are commonly writing CI when they hear the C sound, then they may write it in cases where the word doesn't actually demand it. So in the word syllaba, they might write that CILLABA because that's how they hear it pronounced. And this is a guide to how Latin was pronounced at the time, but if you're translating a text, sometimes it can make it confusing if you don't fully recognize a word and you're a bit confused by a weird spelling. It's because they may have spelled it wrong because they are writing phonetically to them. Here is a manuscript where you can see some examples of ecau data. Why did I choose this one? I think I completely messed up. I think this is one which doesn't have very much ecau data. This is really stupid. Oh, okay. This is Caroline Minuscule, and it's got a lot of It's got a lot of abbreviations, but it does not seem to have the ecau data. Does it have the E? Ah, so there's, well, no, I'm wrong. Yeah. I don't know why this is there. This is very stupid, because it doesn't have the ecau data. This is meant to be an example, but anyway. There's some Lake Caroline Minuscule for you. You know what it looks like by now. And here is a quote from some research I did on the pronunciation of AE in English, 9th century Latin, according to evidence from the Charters of Christ Church, Canterbury. Don't cite this, it's not published anywhere, it's not a real thing, it's just an observation I made that is interesting. You can pause the video to read that paragraph if you want to, and I will go back in order to end the video on an actual example of the ecau data, so that I'm not like leaving you completely bereft of ecau data. Do we have one here? Oh no, this is really embarrassing. I've not actually included an ecau data for you. I'm so sorry. I mean, you can see an ecau data there. You know what it looks like. It'll probably be, can I skip way to the end? Ooh, I can do. Okay, let's do that. Bam. So here are the Germanic versions of the Strasbourg oaths, and I'll just read this out for you quickly. Shout out to any people from Gutewigs if they can understand this. In Godes mina induithes Christianes folches in dunser vedero gealtnisi fontese moda jeframoradesso framso mirgot jewissa indimiad furgibit soledites an minan bruder soso mamit rectu sinan bruder skal inthi utha zermig soso maduo indimit luheren in nohen mit. And then I witting nege ganga on heminan in julio uno kes caden werchen. So that's my very butchered attempt at pronouncing the Tudic Germanic version of the Strasbourg oaths. Do forgive me. Here is the sort of Latin version. Sorry, they call this the Romana lingua. So, however, when each person had said it, the oath, in their own language, it is sort of given thus in the Roman language, and it says "Si Ludovigus Sagrament," and here's the ecau data. Look there, E with the tail. I got it in the end. There we go. Okay, so now I've left you with an ecau data, and I will read out the Romana lingua version of this oath. Si Ludovigus Sagrament, que son fratre Carlo jurat conservat, et Carlos mercen de seu part non los tanit, si retornar non lent pois, ne yo ne neos quio recurrar, int pois, in nulla adiuva contra Ludovic nulli ver teudisca autem lingua. So that's my crude attempt at reading the Romana lingua, which is probably the Latin, the Romance language they're speaking in Rome, if I would try and guess. And a good early example of Romance languages. Here is another sort of Tudic Germanic oath, and I will read it out for you so you can understand it and you can appreciate the quite attractive Caroline Minuscule script. Again, forgive me for butchering the early medieval German. Ober Karl thenid thenere sine no broder hid huinge jesword jelistit indlud huig min herro thenerdimo jesword for brechit ovihina nes irdunen denamag noch theronoch hin theniches irdu wendelmag Vidar Carle I moche folus Tinne worth it. And then the rest of that is Latin. Here is a fun little one that I will leave you on because it's a nice little joke to end it on. This is from a compilation of Lombardic law, and it's banning cuckoldry, and the participants in cuckoldry will be put to death. Gloriosissimus Luitbrand adit princeps, si quis dixere conjugi sue, malalicentia dandum vade concube, cum tale homine aut dixerit ad homine, veni et fac cum muliere meam carnis convictionem, et si talem malum factum fuerit, et causa probata fuerit, quod per ipsum maritum eius factum sit, itas statuimus ut illa mulier qui hoc malum fecerit et consenserit moriatur, sicut in anteriore dicto continet. I'm not going to translate that because this is a Christian Minecraft server, and I'm going to leave it there. So thank you guys so much for coming with me through this tour of Caroline Minuscule script. It's an important script, so you get your practice in. There will be links in the slide and in the description to where you can find Caroline Minuscule manuscripts to practice from. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next video where we see what happens when Caroline script developed. So goodbye.